is a story time video about the time I crashed the car into a bank. Yeah, that happened. So this must have been about 10 years ago. I think I must have just turned 18, and I usually would drive one of my parents' cars. It was a stick shift BMW 325. It was like an 88 or something. It was really old. And we also had the same model of car, but it was an 85. Yeah, one was an 88 and one was an 85. So I had basically learned to drive in our giant Dodge Ram van, and I had learned to drive stick shift in this little Beamer. So I was pretty confident in it. I'd been driving it for a while, and one day I was getting ready to actually go to my first ever Japanese TV shoot. I think this might have been my first ever film shoot, period. A friend of mine had gone to audition, she needed a ride, and I gave her a ride, and they had me audition, and I ended up booking it. Super awkward, but it was kind of a weird day already because they didn't have any translators yet, so it was all just like communication in broken English, and I just knew I'd booked the role and how much I was getting paid and where I was supposed to go and when, but I didn't really have a lot of other details other than in the audition I drank a glass of water and had to act like it was poisoned. But it was a weird day, and I was getting ready to go, and I knew I had to go to the bank to get some cash before I hit the road. So the bank that I had been banking with pretty much since I was 7 years old opened a new branch just across the freeway. And my house was off of a pretty busy street, and then that street would connect to a main street that would take you all the way across town over the freeway and directly to the shopping center where the new bank was. So I decided to go try that bank out. Hadn't been there before. Why not? And for some reason, the car that I usually drove was not there that day, and my dad gave me permission to drive the other car, which I had never driven, but you know, they're both stick shift, they're the same car pretty much, they're just different years. I think the only difference really was that like one had a moonroof and the other didn't, so no big deal, right? Well, I actually had a bit of the flu. I was recovering from the flu, which I had then given to my father, who was at home sick with the flu, which is why his car was available. And so I was, just getting over it. I hadn't taken any medication, so it's not like I was high on anything. I was just kind of like powering through the sniffles, and, when you work in film, there's no one to replace you, so I was getting ready to go to work either way. I got in the car and I drove really slowly to the end of the block because, it wasn't that far and you have to stop at the stop sign. And then I turned right and then immediately turned left, and that was on the main street. And I didn't have to stop either of those times, and I got all green lights all the way across town, all the way over the freeway, all the way to where this bank was. I'll make this compact be the bank. So I came in the driveway this way and then drove around the bank, and there was like a little concrete island that stuck out at the front of the bank over here, and the parking spaces were all in front of the bank. Always sirens in the ghetto. So I pulled off of the main road and then down this little side road and then into the parking lot, and I was going to drive around that concrete island and park in the space right out front of the bank. Well, on the car that I was used to driving, if you just tap the brake, it would come to a dead stop. It was a really sensitive braking system, and you barely had to put any pressure on it, completely would stop. This car, not so much. So I go around the concrete thing, and I'm pulling into the parking space, and I hit the brake, and basically nothing happens. So the car jumps the curb, gets some freaking air, and then lands on top of this concrete planter that was attached to this sort of patio area in the front of the bank. And there are all these huge glass windows, and everyone in the bank can see what's happening. So I crash into this concrete thing attached to the front of the bank. Everyone's looking at me. I can see in the bank. This woman comes running out. I think she was the manager of the new branch, and they had only been open for 2 days. Like, this was their grand opening, and I'm sitting there in the car like, what the hell just happened? I'm completely in shock. I don't know what's going on. I can't fathom how this could have happened. You know, I was pressing the brake and then nothing. So she comes running out of the bank, and I'm sitting there like, and she starts screaming, "Get out of the car!" And I'm like, and then she kept switching between these two modes where half of the time she was like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And the other half of the time she was like, "Get out of the car!" It was really confusing. Very confusing. So I put my hands up in the air like I'm not robbing the place, because I'm pretty sure that's what she thought was happening, and I was just really bad at it. So I eventually open the door and I climb out of the car, which is like jacked up at an angle on top of this concrete planter. And she's asking me if I'm okay, and I'm not really sure what happened, and I'm apologizing and just completely in shock. So I called my poor dad, who was at home with the flu, and told him what happened. And by this time, you know, I guess the car that I had usually driven was home, so he drove that car out to come get me. And he pulled up in the parking lot, and he silently got out, and he looked at the car and went, and then he managed to get the car off of the concrete planter and looked underneath. I guess there wasn't that much wrong with it. There was like a stabilizing bar system underneath the car that was bent and smashed in, and instead of reconnecting it, he just kind of like put it up there with some zip ties and called it good. Because every time I looked under the car after that, there were zip ties there, so I guess that part was not very important to the overall function of this vehicle. And so we established with the bank manager that I was not actually trying to rob this institution. And then she asked me, you know, what I had been there for, and I said I was just going to use the ATM. And she tells me, "You should have used the drive-through." Yeah. So then my dad drove our injured vehicle home, and I followed behind him in the car that I was used to driving. And it never happened again. And I began my illustrious career in Japanese television. Good times.